In the previous video, we were talking about the learning, separating it from external to the student, to things that are more internalized, extrinsic motivation versus intrinsic motivation. Okay. Now, as a teacher, and I have a chart, and you have it in the PowerPoint. I call it a motivational tree here. But when we talk about a humanistic approach to motivation, all right. Think about where have you heard that word before? A humanistic approach, humanism. You've had a psychology class before. You might have heard of Maslow. Okay, Maslow talks about a humanistic approach to motivation. Now, here we're not talking just about behavioral cognitive views. Here we're talking about the total person. All right. And the idea is that and that you'll remember, many of you will remember if you've had talked about Maslow before, is this idea of a hierarchy of needs. That's what this is right here. Okay, a hierarchy of needs, starting at the most basic level, the physiological needs, moving up to safety needs, to love and belonging needs, to esteem needs, to a need for self-actualization. And we'll talk about each one of these independently. But the idea behind this hierarchy, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, is that the new and higher needs emerge as lower needs are fulfilled, or at least sufficiently taken care of. So that means that as we take care of the basis for this pyramid, for this foundation right here, when we take care of these things, that allows the student to focus on it, not necessarily self-actualization, but at least maybe perhaps reaching their true potential, what it is that they can do at the best of their ability. How do I get that out of our students? All right. And one of the things that I really can draw a nice parallel, if you think about information processing theory and Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you'll notice a very common thread there. Remember, with information processing theory, we recognize that we have a limited attention span, limited working memory capacity. And if we start getting inundated with too many pieces of information, too much stuff at one time, we shut down. It's hard for us to process that information. So, how do I help my students learn more effectively? I pare it down. I meet their needs based on their age and their work and memory capacity, et cetera, to help them be able to process the information effectively. Well, ideally, I want my students to be able to self-actualize, which in our terms, for our practices as teachers, we want our students to be able to reach or strive towards their potential within the classroom, within the content that we're teaching, or the skill that we're learning, or the if it's in band, it's the instrument that they're playing, right? So we're trying to help them develop their skills to a point where they're really maximizing much of their potential. The idea is potential. It's going to keep going on and on and on. We don't ever really get that true potential, right? We're working towards something. Well, think about these things. They call these deficiency needs, the first four. And if we don't meet these deficiency needs, think about it from an information processing perspective. They're distractions. When I'm distracted, it's really hard for me to be able to process information effectively. How do I get to be the best person I can be when I'm thinking about all this other stuff? So Maslow's talking about, he's referring to as the growth need, self-actualization, and the deficiency needs being these things that if they're not taken care of, how the heck am I supposed to focus on reaching true potential, right? So at the most basic level are those physiological needs. The physiological needs are the things like I'm hungry, I'm thirsty, I'm cold, I'm too hot, I'm whatever it might be, right? How often have you come to a class and you haven't eaten in more than a few hours, and you are sitting there at lunchtime and you're about ready to take a class, and the teacher's talking, and all you're thinking about is, oh God, I'm so hungry. I got to get out of here. I got to go get something to eat. I wish I had a snack with me. I wish. It's a distraction, right? We have programs in place in schools, Head Start, free and reduced lunches. When we realize that kids are perhaps not having a meal before they come to school, we're trying to take care of that, because we know if they haven't eaten since last night dinner time, or maybe even yesterday lunch period, they're going to be highly distracted. How do we expect them to do a lot of heavy lifting academically if all they're thinking about is how hungry or thirsty they are? So we try to take care of those things, right? So physiological needs are an important element that we try to take care of. Secondly, is safety needs. Think about what it means to be safe at school, safe at home, safe in the classroom. Has a lot of different meanings depending upon the environment where you're at. If you get a chance, type in or Google a trailer. It's a movie trailer from a movie in the 80s. It's called 3 O'Clock High. 3 O'Clock High. It's a 2-minute trailer, but it's pretty funny. And what you'll see in this trailer is a kid who's a good kid is going to be getting in a fight after school. Okay? So all day long, what do you think he's thinking about? He's thinking about this fight. Of course, it happens to be the new kid in the school, big kid, bully, the whole 9 yards. And he's just like going to try to any possible way he can get out of that fight. He's going to do it. Well, you think a lot of learning took place that day? No, because all he could think about was his safety. Same thing happens in a classroom. Students come to a classroom. They have a classmate who's constantly cracking jokes at his expense, making them feel small, snickering, laughing, rolling their eyes. Those are things that are well within your control as a teacher. What kind of environment do you create in your classroom? If you allow that stuff to go on, it may happen for, by one student only, but pretty soon you could start seeing it happen by more and more kids because they start to see that reap the benefits of picking on somebody else makes them feel good. Maybe other kids laugh, and then suddenly you've got these bad behaviors being reinforced because the teacher's not doing anything. So as a teacher, we have a real pivotal role that we play in creating an environment that students can feel safe. So and we've talked about this with bullying and all this other stuff too, we have to think about what does this environment, our classroom environment, our school, okay, what are we doing to minimize the safety concerns so the students can actually focus on being the best student that they can be. Third is this idea of love and belonging needs. And I know, I always sit there and I laugh because I think, Eric, I'm going to be teaching secondary English. I'm going to be teaching math. I'm going to teach like love and belonging. Are you kidding me? And I always laugh because who doesn't want to feel like they belong? Think about adolescence. Adolescence is much of the time it's primarily focused on fitting in, developing a sense of belonging. That's a big part of school. And if it's a big part of school, then you have to ask yourself, what part do I play as a teacher? I always laugh. Think about your classroom. Think about the environment that you create. I can remember when one of my daughters was really young, going to a school. In the school, you saw a lot of the kids were very standoffish, kind of at arm's length. They just didn't like, And I one day I saw one of my daughters hug this other student, and the student it was kind of like awkward, just the idea of that somebody's touching me or hugging me or whatever it is. I'm talking like 4 years old, right? And I'm thinking to myself, like really, like at 4, like that's how the kids. I'm like, what is this, right? And then later that afternoon, I'm going to a different classroom, and I see my daughter goes into this classroom, and all the kids in the back of the classroom yell out her name, and they're like, oh, they come running up and they're laughing, and she's introducing me, and we're talking. And I just thought, wow, that's a different environment. And you feel better when you go into a classroom where you're well received and kids are willing to participate and laugh with you and respect you and all of that stuff. What happens is you develop a real sense of belonging, and that goes a long way from a student feeling less distracted and like they can actually perhaps achieve some of their academic or athletic or musical interests, whatever it might be. Last one is this idea of esteem needs. A lot of kids, especially adolescents, we go through that awkward phase and it extends for a period of years, and that we can really become very self-conscious and thinking about how do people think, what do they think about us, how do they view us, am I tall, too short, too heavy, too skinny, too many pimples? You think about all that stuff. It is like everybody experiences it. And of course, the adolescent centrism kicks in. And what do we think? It's just me, right? Nobody else understands because nobody else has this big pimple on their forehead that looks like, like Mount Vesuvius, right? So the idea is that, and a funny story is I can remember one time I was in school. God, I had to be in 6th grade, 7th grade. I can remember putting a Band-Aid over the top of this huge pimple I had, acting like it was an injury of some sort. I was just so embarrassed that I had this huge pimple. Kids think that stuff all the time. But what we're talking about is, how do we feel about ourselves? And when we have a classroom where our esteem is not being built up, it's very easy for us to be focused on other things. All of these things, when we're focusing on these, how do I become that best student that I can be? And so as a teacher, we're trying to create an environment where our students can feel like they can be the best version of themselves. So having said that, I always think that every classroom presents challenges, and each classroom presents dangers. And the idea is, as a teacher, is we have to do that little mathematics here. We say, okay, what does our classroom look like? Is our classroom fun? Enthusiasm? We see it? Are they challenged? Are we respectful? Do we, what are the things that we're doing? Or is our environment one more of intimidation? Or we're worried about people, what mistakes they make? Do we laugh, or do we point out? Do other kids point out when kids are making mistakes? What kind of environment do you create or you foster? If you create an environment that is challenging, okay, not very threatening, but challenging in a fun way, that's what we're talking about. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to achieve. That's what Maslow was trying to highlight with his hierarchy of needs. Then, with a cognitive approach to motivation, we're talking about need to understand. Okay, a need to understand to make sense of the things around them. Now, motivation is driven by a need to understand, having control, and self-determination. Now, as teachers, we can question our students. That's where, by questioning our students, we get a chance to find their gaps in knowledge. What does they understand? What don't they understand? What prior learning do they have? When we know that, that's how we start to create that disequilibrium. Remember Piaget? Okay, we create that disequilibrium because we know where they're at, and we can challenge them. Okay, we challenge them in a meaningful way. By doing that, that's where we start to create this intrinsic need, focus to understand. Now, in cognition, a cognitive approach to motivation, we recognize that every task, the things that our students do, is almost like on a teeter-totter. Okay, there's a need to achieve on one side of the teeter-totter or seesaw, and on the other side is this fear of failure. And we know from Piaget and other people from a cognitive standpoint is that humans have inside of them a desire to make sense and understand the world around them. So in a classroom, they want to understand stuff. We want to know stuff, right? However, that need to understand is always balanced by a fear of failure. Need to understand, fear of failure. When that, like a teeter-totter seesaw, when the need to understand, it's really, really, low. Like I don't really care. I should say that fear of failure is really high. Like I'm really concerned about making a mistake and looking silly. Well, the fear of failure is so high. What has to happen? That need to understand is really low. But when your need to understand is really high, you want to know this stuff. You need to understand this because it makes you feel good. You like it. You want to know it. What has to happen? The fear of failure becomes really low. Okay? And so the idea is, as a teacher, is we're trying to create an environment where the students will want to make sense of the world around them. That's what Piaget was always talking about. That's that idea of equilibration. In and out of this equilibrium. I know where you're at. I challenge you until you kind of figure that stuff out. And then I let you work with it, and then I create this equilibrium again. The need to understand is always balanced by a fear of failure. When that fear of failure is too high, the need to understand is really low. So we've got to get this fear of failure out of our classroom.